Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you. If you are new to this study, I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin, and it's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we will be looking at the book of Zechariah, chapter 11. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Zechariah 11, grab something to take some good notes with, grab a beverage, and grab a snack. Let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day has been going well. Pray that you had a good weekend. Happy Monday. Good to be with you here again this evening as we continue our journey through the Bible, one chapter at a time. And we are now into Holy Week, and we are into the final chapters of this book of Zechariah. So tonight we will be looking at chapter 11. Tomorrow we will look at chapter 12, and then we will conclude this book with a look at chapter 13 and 14 on Wednesday, and that will end our study of Zechariah, and that will also end our study for the week as we head into the end of Holy Week on Thursday and Friday. We won't have any study. My prayer is that you're able to attend a service, a Holy Thursday service, a Seder meal, whatever that may be on Thursday, and then a Good Friday service on Friday. So we'll be wrapping up here with this book in a couple days, and just wanted to share a reminder that beginning April 13th, so 2 weeks from tonight, we will be moving our Facebook stream to the Ashland Methodist Church Facebook page. Our YouTube stream will stay the same. Our webpage stream will stay the same. The only thing that's changing is we are moving off of this page onto the church page. So I encourage you to make a note of the link there on your screen to the Ashland Methodist Church page, Facebook page, and follow that page so you can stay in touch with us as we begin the New Testament on April 13th. So we have 3 studies this week in Zechariah. We'll have probably 3 studies next week in Malachi, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. It's only 4 short chapters, so we will probably do chapter 1 on Monday, chapter 2 on Tuesday, and chapters 3 and 4 on Wednesday. And then we'll break for the weekend and begin our study of the New Testament on the 13th. So just sharing some upcoming news. It's an exciting time here. Hard to believe we are towards the end of this book. Only 7 chapters left to look at after tonight. And one of those is Zechariah chapter 11. So now we are going to look at the rejection of the true king. Chapters 9 and 10 picture an image of blessing and prosperity. Chapter 11 paints a picture of sin and punishment. So preceding the fulfillment of the prophecies of blessing comes this apostasy of Israel and their rejection of the Good Shepherd, their Messiah, with this consequent visitation of God coming upon them with this punishment. So chapters 9 and 10, they proclaim a very positive future for the people. Chapter 11 explains why that vision for a positive future is necessary. And the reason that they need that positive future is because they are going to be punished after rejecting their king. Very appropriate that we are in these chapters here as we enter Holy Week, because they tie in so significantly. It's not planned that way. I can't take credit for that. It just worked out that way. But it's very impactful falling on this week of what this rejection of Messiah truly meant for the people. And in this chapter, we're going to see several shepherds, verses 1 through 3, the wailing shepherds. verses 4 through 14, the true shepherd, and then verses 15 through 17, the false shepherd. So let's get right into it here. Open up your Bibles to Zechariah chapter 11, and if you don't have a Bible, not a problem. As always, we put all the verses right up here on the screen for you so you can follow along. Take some good notes tonight, and let's start with this pronouncement of this coming doom and these wailing shepherds. Verse 1. Open your doors, Lebanon, so that fire may devour your cedars. So Zechariah is announcing in this very vigorous poetic language that Lebanon's famous cedar trees were going to perish. Now, the Israelites often referred to the royal palace in Jerusalem as Lebanon. Why? Because it contained so much cedar from the cedar trees from Lebanon. And that goes back to Jeremiah and 1 Kings. So where it says, open your doors, Lebanon, that's a reference to Jerusalem. Verse 2, also the cedar tree also was a symbol of the royal house of Judah, the family of Judah. That goes back to Ezekiel. So this reference to Lebanon here, this is symbolic of Jerusalem. So verse 2. So open your doors, Lebanon, wail, you juniper, for the cedar has fallen, that stately tree, they are ruined. Wail, you oaks of Bashan, the dense forest has been cut down. So likewise, the juniper trees, which are pine, the oaks of Bashan, these oak trees, they should all wail. These are the wailing shepherds. Why? Because they too are going to perish in this coming devastation. Lebanon, famous for its cedars. Bashan, famous for its oaks. And in chapter 10 that we saw last week, Zechariah combined Lebanon and Bashan to indicate the whole land, right? That's another example of a merism. So Lebanon and Bashan, they are encompassing of all the land. And all these trees, the cedar, the oak, the pine, they all symbolize the people of the land as well as the land itself. The judgment that is going to come would affect the whole land of Canaan, the promised land, and its people, and that includes the rulers which are in view here. In particular, the cedar tree is a metaphor for a king. Verse 3. Listen to the wail of the shepherds, right? These are the wailing shepherds. Their rich pastures are destroyed. Listen to the roar of the lions. The lush thicket of the Jordan is ruined. So the shepherds and the lions, which represented the rulers and the leaders of Israel, they too would wail because this coming destruction would leave no pasture for their flocks. There would be no lairs for the beasts, no food for the beasts. The flocks and the beasts here are symbols of people. So with these wailing shepherds in mind, in view of what follows now in verses 4 through 14, verses 1 through 3 are a description of the devastation of Canaan that comes as a result of the rejection of the Messiah. Now, this prediction had partial fulfillment in 70 AD when the Romans came in and they destroyed Jerusalem and they scattered the Jews at that time. But the complete fulfillment will come in the future, in a future time, especially this destruction that is going to overtake the land, because that will fall in the time of the Great Tribulation. So now we come to the Good Shepherd. Verses 1 through 3 were the wailing shepherd. Now verses 4 through 14, the Good Shepherd. And the reason for the devastation of the people and the land that was just described in the first 3 verses, the reason for all that now becomes apparent. The reason for that is the people's rejected of the Messiah, the shepherd king. And God's going to graciously give his people another good leader. We'll see that here in verses 4 through 6, but they're going to reject this shepherd that God is going to provide for them. So verse 4, this is what the Lord my God, and note it says my God says, shepherd the flock marked for slaughter. So Yahweh, Zechariah's God, my God, instructs Zechariah to present himself as a shepherd who is assigned to care for or to shepherd or to pasture the sheep that were doomed for slaughter. Verse 5, their buyers slaughter them and go unpunished. So those who bought the sheep would slaughter the sheep and would go unpunished for slaughtering the sheep. In other words, they would not be held guilty for what they were doing. And that was bad. That was a very bad thing, because the sheep in mind here are female sheep. They are ewes that are intended for breeding. They weren't intended for slaughtering. And so the symbolism here, the butchers represent the foreign rulers who take over the Israelites, persecute them, and had not paid the full penalty for their abusive treatment of the Israelites. So the buyers that slaughter them and go unpunished are these foreign rulers. The sheep are representative of the Israelites who were meant to be prosperous in the land. Next verse. Those who sell them say, praise the Lord, I am rich. Their own shepherds do not spare them. So those who sold the sheep were Israel's former leaders who by their sins had set the people up for divine judgment by the foreign kings. Now this goes back to the false prophets who had led the people astray, led them to believe that these other kingdoms were going to take care of them. So that's who this represents. Verse 6, for I will no longer have pity on the people of the land, declares the Lord. I will give everyone into the hands of their neighbors and their king, and they will devastate the land, and I will not rescue anyone from their hands. So God's displeasure is the reason for the misery of the sheep, the Israelites. God is no longer going to take pity on them. And so what he's going to do is cause the men of Israel to become dependent on the power of another kingdom, these foreign nations and these foreign kings. And the followers here would strike the land, but God would not deliver the people from this king. Now this has reference back to the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Egyptians. History demonstrates that these conditions took place after Israel rejected Messiah and the Romans came in and destroyed everything. So the ruler here that is in view, this foreign king, is Caesar. The striking of the land that took place was 70 AD, when after this Jewish revolt, the Romans came in, destroyed the city, destroyed the temple, which has not been rebuilt yet. And so in partial fulfillment, this has taken place nearly 2,000 years ago, 70 AD. Verse 7. So I shepherded the flock that was marked for slaughter. So Zechariah is carrying out his assignment from God in verse 4, particularly the oppressed of the flock. And then I took 2 staffs, and I called one of the staffs favor, I called the other union, and I shepherded the flock. So Zechariah is speaking as a shepherd of the sheep who are doomed for slaughter, the afflicted sheep of the flock. And by following God's commission here, this assignment, he's representing the coming Messiah. And he has 2 shepherd's staffs, which he names favor, or the way it translates is pleasantness or graciousness. And the other staff he names union, which means binder or unifier. And these 2 staffs represent God's blessing and the unity of the flock. Now, according to pagan legend, the god Baal, this pagan god Baal, he held two clubs named Driver and Chaser. And he used these two clubs to battle the deities of the sea. And so it's appropriate here that God's messenger Zechariah also has two clubs, two shepherd staffs. But instead of fighting, like Baal's clubs were named Driver and Chaser, Zechariah's clubs are called Blessing and Unity. Verse 8, Zechariah continues, in 1 month I got rid of the three shepherds. So Zechariah, as the representative of God, did away with these three shepherds that had been leading the flock within the first month that he took charge of them, leading them astray. And these appear to be real shepherds within a real literal month period. Now, who these shepherds were, these false shepherds, or who they will be, because we don't know if this has completely come to fulfillment yet, that's the subject of a lot of debate, and more that we can go into here. There's some interpreters that believe these shepherds to be three classes of leaders, and the reason I want to share this one with you is because in Luke 9:22, Luke's Gospel 9, verse 22, Jesus names these three groups of leaders. The elders, the chief priests, and the scribes. And in Luke 9:22, you'll see this. Jesus said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, the teachers of the law. And he must be killed, and then on the third day be raised to life. So this is a very difficult verse to understand who these three shepherds are. But one possible interpretation comes through Jesus' words in Luke's Gospel 9:22, that these are elders, chief priests, and scribes, teachers of the law. Next verse. Zechariah continues, he took over shepherding the flock, and the flock detested me, and I grew weary of them. And so I said, I will not be your shepherd. Let the dying die, let the perishing perish. Let those who are left eat one another's flesh. So Zechariah, as God's representative, turns them over to their fate, right? Which in this case means some of them are going to die. Some of them will be driven off the land. Some will die. Others will devour themselves in this cannibalistic act. And in fact, the Israelites did literally eat one another during the siege of Jerusalem in the 1st century AD. Evidently, they're going to do so again in the time of the Great Tribulation, but there's really no specific prophecy about this. But we have seen this before in the prophets, where they had turned to cannibalism as a means of survival. But eating someone's flesh is also a metaphor. It's a metaphor for destroying somebody else. So Zechariah is going to turn them over to themselves and just let what's going to happen by withholding his leadership. He's abandoning the people to the consequences of their rejection of the Messiah, that being death and destruction. He's simply just going to let things run their course, right? He's going to turn them over to what they want. Verse 10. And so I took my staff. Remember, he has two staffs. And so he took the staff called favor, and he broke it. And he revoked the covenant, he says, that I made with all the nations. Now, Zechariah, he breaks this staff into pieces, which is imagery of ending the blessing, the pastoral care that he was providing to the flock. Now, where it says revoking the covenant, this is not one of the biblical covenants that God established through Abraham or through Moses. Why do we say that? Because God never breaks his promise. God's covenant is his promise, and God will never break a promise. So this is not one of those covenants in view here. What this refers to is the safety, the security that he had been providing, and the restraint that he had been exercising in his judgment of Jerusalem or of Israel so far. So the term covenant here is used in a very loose sense. It's not descriptive of a formal agreement entered into between God and the people. This is more representative of God is revoking his patience, his restraint, and he's going to allow this punishment to come. Verse 11, and it was revoked on that day, and so the oppressed of the flock who were watching me knew it was the word of the Lord. So Zechariah's audience realized what he had done when he broke his staff favor. Because the staff favor was in harmony with the Lord, and by it being broken now, that harmony with God has been shattered. And the afflicted of the flock, the oppressed of the flock, these are the faithful Israelites who were listening to Zechariah, but the judgment is still going to come on the people nonetheless. Now, God promised through the covenant with Moses that if his people turned from him, apostatized, he would cast them off temporarily, right? And he would allow the nations to punish them. That was God's promise through the covenant with Moses. If you do this, I will punish you. And that is what is happening here. Verse 12, I told them, if you think it best, give me my pay, but if not, keep it. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver. Since Zechariah was symbolically terminating his protection of the flock by breaking the staff named favor, now he's asking them to pay his wages, or if they didn't want to do that, to just keep what they owed him. Now, he's not concerned about the money. What he's concerned about is what the flock feels about this whole event taking place. So he breaks the staff favor. It breaks the bond with God. He says, you can pay me for my time of shepherding you or not, right? Whatever you want to do. But it wasn't about the money. It's like, where was your heart? Now, the sheep weighed out 30 shekels of silver as his pay. This was the price of a gored slave in the Old Testament, in this time period in history, Exodus 21:32. And it was a substantial amount, 30 shekels of silver, but it was a small amount in view of everything that Zechariah had done for the people. And so basically this represents the lowest of the low wages at the time. He's shepherding them. They are rejecting him. He breaks the staff of blessing and says, I'm done with you. Pay me for what I've done for you or not. It's up to you. They agree to pay him, but they pay him what the price of a slave gored by a bull was worth. This was as insulting to Zechariah as they could have been to him. Everything that he had done in his ministry and trying to lead them, to offer him this wage of 30 shekels was worse than not paying him anything. And that's the symbolism here. It would be the equivalent of telling Zechariah, we'll pay you, but all you're going to be able to buy with this is a gored slave who's as good as dead and isn't any use to you at all. So this response, Zechariah says, you can pay me or not. They respond, and that response shows just how unworthy of the care he was providing the people really were. So that's the whole message in this is he breaks the staff of favor. And instead of repentance or turning back to the Lord, they pay Zechariah with something that was more insulting than not paying him anything at all. Verse 13, and then the Lord said to me, throw it, and this is the 30 pieces of shekel, or 30 shekels of silver, throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they valued me. So this is sarcasm by God, right? And God instructs Zechariah very sarcastically, throw this 30 shekels of silver to the potter. Since it's such a grand wage, give it to the potter. And so I, Zechariah, took the 30 pieces of silver and I threw them to the potter in the house of the Lord. So Zechariah threw this pittance, this 30 shekels of silver, to the potter in the temple. So apparently this is all taking place in the temple area. Throwing something to the potter was a proverbial way of expressing disdain for the money, because the potters were typically poor. They were lowly craftsmen. And so to throw the money at them would be very insulting to them as well. It would just show complete disdain for them. Now, the fulfillment of this prophecy it took place in Matthew 27. And in Matthew 27, Judas takes the 30 pieces of silver that he's been paid by the priests to betray Jesus, takes it and throws it back at them in the temple. And so this is fulfillment of this prophecy here in Matthew 27. And again, very interesting, we enter into Holy Week. So as we consider Holy Thursday and Jesus being betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, this is fulfillment of this prophecy from Zechariah. The money is flung down in the temple, and the priests take it. And what do? They go buy a field of a potter, and they use it as a burying ground for the poor. Verse 14. Back to Zechariah, verse 14. And then I broke the second staff, which was called union. And this is symbolic of breaking the family bond between Judah and Israel. So Zechariah then symbolically breaks the second staff, union, which indicates an end to the unity that bound the people together. The northern kingdom Israel, the southern kingdom Judah. Just before the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Israelites broke into separate parties that were very hostile towards one another. And all of that accelerated the destruction by the Romans because they had fragmented. And so when the Romans came in, there was no unity among the people, and the Romans just marched through Jerusalem without any issue at all. Now, the order of these events is significant, and it's historical. The breaking of God's favor on his people and the rejection of the shepherd, the Messiah, and the breaking of the unity, we've seen this happen. And it happens here in Holy Week, and it's happened since. And we know that this destruction, though, it's not permanent. How do we know it's not permanent? Because of God's promises that he will reunite and restore his people. He will punish them, but he won't permanently cast them off. The human chaos, a lot of human chaos taking place in the world, it lies squarely on the shoulders of us. God offered his shepherd. God offered the Messiah, but he was rejected. And he was killed, and he was crucified, and so this is all to the detriment of the people, but God is not casting them off permanently. Restoration will come. So that's the Good Shepherd. Now verses 15 through 17 highlight the Bad Shepherd. So the fate of Israel is not recounted in the rejection of the Good Shepherd that God had raised up to tend them. The complete woe on the people centers in the acceptance of the bad shepherd that God will allow to rise up and destroy them. The one dark episode here centers in the events of the Messiah's first advent and his death. it's followed by the dissolution of the Jewish nation. That was verses 1 through 14. That was a bad enough event. Now, the second bad experience is going to occur in the events that are connected with the Messiah's second coming and his returning glory. And that's going to deal with this final time of unparalleled trouble that Israel is going to face in the time of the tribulation. So yes, there will be restoration, but first there was this horrific experience, verses 1 through 14, the rejection of Messiah and God turning the people over to their own fate. When the Messiah returns, at that time, this is in the midst of the tribulation, so Israel is going to be going through some very unparalleled difficulty at the time of Christ's return. So let's look at this bad shepherd. Verse 15. Then the Lord said to me, take again the equipment of a foolish shepherd. So God's directing Zechariah, present himself as a fool, a worthless shepherd, a morally deficient shepherd. Why? Because the flock had rejected the good shepherd. So if this is what the people want, give them a fool. Verse 16, for I'm going to raise up a shepherd over the land who will not care for the lost, or seek the young, or heal the injured, or feed the healthy. Instead, he will eat the meat of the choice sheep, tearing off their hooves. So in this new role, Zechariah now is to represent the bad shepherd, the one who's going to fail to do for the sheep all that the good shepherd should do for the sheep. Instead of tending to the flock, he's going to be very self-serving. Israel's preference for Barabbas over Jesus at Jesus' trial before Pilate, and Pilate says, I can release one of these to you according to your own custom. Who do you want? The criminal Barabbas or this Messiah Jesus? And we know the crowd shouts, give us Barabbas. This is the willingness of the people to accept a bad shepherd in place of a good one. Now, this choosing of Barabbas doesn't fulfill this prophecy, but it's a good indication of what this is going to look like. Now, in this verse of the bad shepherd, will not care for the lost, will not seek the young, will not heal the injured. If we remove that word not, then we see the description of a truly effective, good shepherd to care for the lost, to seek the young or the scattered, to heal the injured, to feed the healthy. This is what the church should be doing today, right here. But when the bad shepherd comes, it's the opposite. Will not do any of these things. And then tearing off the hooves of the sheep. That represents this bad shepherd as being very greedy, self-serving, searching for the last edible morsel that he can extract from his people that he has consumed, right? He's going to bleed the people for everything he can. That's what that means, to tear at the hooves. Verse 17, but woe to the worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. May his arm be completely withered and his right eye be blinded. God's announcing judgment on this worthless shepherd for abandoning his flock. And what this condemnation applies to is all the evil kings of Israel, of Judah, who had let their people down, led the people astray. But one particular king is in view here. And God's going to paralyze this leader's power, that's his arm. God's going to nullify his intelligence, that's his right eye. And God's going to render him incapable of hurting other people or defending himself. Now, who is this bad shepherd? a lot of study poured into this. Some interpreters see this person as being Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba was a leader who led a ineffective revolt, a Jewish revolt against the Romans in 132 AD, but failed. Another view here is that when Jesus said to the Pharisees in John 9, "It is for judgment that I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, those who see may become blind," he's referring to the Pharisees. But it seems that the ultimate fulfillment of this verse comes through the Antichrist, who's going to make covenant with Israel, but then break that covenant and proceed to persecute Israel. And so this is this whole chapter seems to be viewing from Zechariah's time forward, all culminating in the Antichrist coming to destroy the Jewish nation, which we will see in the end times in the tribulation. And so the judgment here that we see in verse 17, it brings to a close the cycle of prophecy that began in chapter 9, verse 1. So from chapter 9 through chapter 11, verse 14, this is the prophecy of judgment. And this verse seems to bring it all to a close. Now, what has happened here? Judgment has gone from the circumference, the nations surrounding Israel. That's how we started this book. Judgment started with the nations surrounding Israel, and then it worked its way into the center, to Israel itself. Now judgment is going out from Israel into the entire world. So Zechariah is going to, when we get into chapter 14 on Wednesday, we're going to see this. The direction of the judgment started with the nations around Israel and worked its way into Israel itself. When we get to chapter 14, it's going to turn around, and that judgment is going to start in Israel and work its way out to the nations of the world. But with this climactic scene, this first prophetic burden that describes the first advent, the coming of the Messiah, and the rejection of the Messiah, it all comes to a close at this point. And now the way is opened for the second burden, which is, like I mentioned earlier tonight, the second advent, the coming of the Christ, the acceptance of the Messiah, but then the judgment to come upon the world. And this all speaks into the book of Revelation. It speaks into the end times. Don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but that is Zechariah chapter 11. And I pray that that has been a help to you. Tomorrow we will look at chapter 12. And Wednesday we'll look at chapters 13 and 14. And then we will conclude this book. So just 3 chapters left to go. And then we'll get into Malachi next week. And then the following week, the New Testament, the Gospel according to Matthew. So thank you for being here this evening. I do pray that this has been a help to you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe and stay healthy. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Till then, take care and God bless. Bye-bye.